Hello, and thank you for joining us on The Brief. We have had some minor technical difficulties starting out today, and we don't have Markos on quite yet. So I'm going to speed ahead, skip over some of our banter. Oh, there's Markos. Are you live and ready to go? I was going to get right into the guest, but we can chat for a second if you feel like you're ready to go.
Equipment malfunction.
Yeah, right.
Right. We're still working out the kinks and everything.
I haven't really even introduced us. I welcome people to The Brief. That's all right. I've done. So
I can do the quick intro. Hey, everybody. I'm Markos Moulitsas here with Kerry Eleveld. This is our weekly show about politics. Daily Kos is The Brief. Today, we are 2 weeks out from the election, so it is pretty obvious what we're going to be talking about, right, Kerry?
Yeah, swimming. I want to talk about swimming. Let's get into the Olympics too. The Olympics, they're coming up eventually. So at some point,
maybe. So
maybe.
We have
actually, right? They might not be. Sorry. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, we have two great guests today. We have Chuck Rocha. He is the author of the book Tio Bernie. He's a political consultant, focuses on the Latino vote, and as we're going to be talking about the Latino vote, it's going to be very critical, not just this year, but in the years ahead, in establishing sort of a dominant Democratic majority in this country, in those critical Sunbelt states that are changing so rapidly. We also have David Neer. He is the political director at Daily Kos, and we're going to be talking about the Senate and what we can do these last 2 weeks to maximize our chances for a big Senate majority. So we have a great show ahead of us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we're all here. And Kerry, so 2 weeks out, how are you feeling?
Haunted. I mean, I don't know. Is there any Democrat who was alive in 2016 and paying attention who doesn't have that haunting deja vu that sort of hangs over the excitement? So anyway, but I feel good. I mean, I feel excited and haunted at the same time. But let's be really clear that the fundamentals at this point are far better than they were for Hillary Clinton for multiple reasons. The polling's better, both the accuracy of the polling, in terms of the state polling that we have, also in terms of where Joe Biden is, in terms of getting to that 50% threshold in a lot of places. And, people really forget that Trump won in 2016 with 46% of the vote. I'm right about that, right? And then Hillary took 48% of the vote, but that means that there was a lot of third-party voters and people who wrote in and whatever they did that she didn't manage to capture for whatever reason. And so, the prospects on so many levels are better for Joe Biden, particularly because he's closer to that 50% threshold, and he's taking away the opportunity of there being, a Trump win with 46%. While, there's a bunch of votes go to the third party. That's actually almost impossible this year. Yeah.
Right. That's an excellent point, Kerry. And I think people don't realize that when they say Hillary was winning in the polls in 2016, and she won the election, right? So the polls weren't particularly wrong. But even in those critical Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, if you go back and look, most of the polling had her in the mid 40s and had Trump in the low 40s, right? So there's a lot of assumptions being made that the undecided votes were going to go to, or at least split 50-50, right? If not go to Hillary Clinton, just because Trump was so god-awful, right? You couldn't imagine somebody saying I'm undecided, I'm going to go with Trump, which happened. But also there was a very, very large third-party vote in those polling, right? And we're talking about 5-6 points that were supposedly going to third parties. They didn't. They ended up going to Donald Trump in the end. There's no real measurable third-party support in any of the polling today. And in fact, in most of the national polling and in those critical Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Joe Biden is above 50% in virtually all of the polling, if not in all of the polling. And so it's different.
And I think that's largely due to voters just being a lot smarter about what happened in 2016 and saying, there's no way I'm throwing my vote away this time. No way. People may be more excited about Biden. They may be more excited about voting for Trump. They may be trying to save our democracy, but there are not Democratic voters and independent voters who are like, I think I'll just, take a chance on that third party candidate. Like, there's a small number of those folks, but negligible.
No, absolutely. And I was just looking down at some of these early vote totals too. I mean, the numbers are astronomical. In Texas, about over 50% of the people who voted in all of 2016.
Yeah, I may have talked over what you just said, but over 50% we already have over 52% of the amount of vote that came in 2016. That's already happened this far.
And you still have 2 weeks.
Right. In Texas.
And this is despite Republican efforts to limit the number of drop boxes, and they're doing everything they can. And I suspect that it's actually backfiring. Every time they make an effort to restrict the vote, make it harder, I think it just really motivates our side. Because one, nobody wants to tell you what not to do, right? It's just human nature. But two, I think it sends a signal to Democratic voters that, oh my God, they are really worried about the results of this election. And if Texas is working this hard to suppress the urban Democratic vote, then clearly there must be something going on. And so, Kerry, one of the things that's been fascinating in the last couple of weeks is that all Donald Trump had to do to win was to hold all of his states from 2016 and two of the three Rust Belt battlegrounds, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
Right.
All he had to do, he had to hold one of those three, actually, and everything else.
Yeah.
And that seems to have collapsed. And now suddenly they're really spending a lot of time and money and effort in the Sun Belt states. So when you looked at the original battleground states, it was sort of all, northern. It was, there was Arizona, of course, and Florida, and in North Carolina, which are Sun Belt states. But you had those three big Midwestern Rust Belt states. Those seem to be off the board, and you can see that in just the way that Donald Trump and the Republicans are now focusing on Sun Belt states and the new battlegrounds of Arizona battleground, but Georgia as well, and Texas. Right.
Well, I think, I was looking at, you and I both took a look at that Axios article from last week where they talked about, they were sort of, talking to insiders at the campaign and like how they were finger pointed at each other for, who did what wrong. And, that classic, like, I'm going to get it on the board and say this wasn't my fault. It was definitely someone else's fault before, it all caves in. Right. But the other thing they did in that article is talk about what Trump's path, as far as the campaign was concerned, to 270, right? And 270 electoral votes. So anyway, what Bill Stepien was saying, according to that article, was that the building blocks of their campaign to get to 270 took for granted that they would win Florida, Ohio, Georgia, Iowa, and Maine's 2nd district, right? Those were the gimmies. That's what he literally called the easy part.
The easy one, right?
The easy part was Florida and Ohio, of all places, not to mention, Iowa and Georgia. And all of those states are competitive. And in fact, in several of them in the polling aggregates, Florida in particular, Biden looks to have a several point lead right now, like a 4-point.
Never trust Florida, though.
No, I never trust Florida, but I'm just saying, if you're counting on that as your gimme, right? As you and I discussed before, the gimmies for Democrats are New York and California, because those aren't gimmies. Right? That's the base.
Illinois. Nobody's talking about Illinois.
That's where you start building, right? Yeah. So this crazy part of this is that for a while they completely, their new ad buy is, it is crazy small. Their final ad buy for the race, they're broke, and they went in on a combined $55 million ad buy with the RNC. That's them like pooling their resources. Like, can you imagine? They were all sitting around a table and they were like, everybody empty your pockets,
Yeah.
So and I mean, just by comparison, I think Biden's campaign plans to spend 147 million in the final run up of these last 2 weeks. So, but they're spreading that around, and in all of these states, some of which have huge overheads, and the buying the media markets is astronomical at this point. That's not going to go very far. That's not going to go very far into Florida. That's not going to go very far into Georgia. No. That's not going very far.
And they're losing already. So they're trying to gain ground. So Kerry, I think this is a great sort of segue into introducing our first guest, Chuck Rocha. He was a senior advisor to Bernie Sanders, really focused on the Latino vote. And it's actually quite dramatic seeing the difference in Bernie's Latino vote in 2016 and then in 2020. And Chuck looking like a real Texan over there.
So happy to look for me.
So happy to have you on. As the map has changed, as the map has evolved, really the importance of the Latino vote seems to be increasing in importance on a day-to-day basis, given on the map is going. So I know you've been asked this a million times, and I've seen you answer it, in other places, and you do such a really, really good job of it. But how important is that Latino vote in this presidential election?
It's probably, and first of all, thanks for having me. This is an amazing show. Thank y'all so much. And you do such a good job. I've been a big fan even before the video thing y'all got here when y'all were just writing things out like old school people. But anyway, the Latino vote will be probably the single most important factor in the American electorate and the American elections. And let me make my case really quick. And because of the electoral map that Kerry and Markos were just going over, is that the states that this thing now has come down to is pretty much Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. Well, guess what? And where Latinos live in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. Now, a lot of you there who may not do Latino outreach every day think, Chuck, Pennsylvania, I think of steelworkers, I think of the tea, I think of Hershey bars. I never really think about Latinos. Well, let me give you a little schooling. Is that the largest population of Puerto Ricans in the country outside of Florida does not live in New York. They live in Pennsylvania. And that was before Hurricane Katrina. After the hurricane on the island, on the island, there's been 150,000 new Puerto Ricans who've had to move in with their family members on the eastern side. So everything from Reading to northern Philadelphia is all Puerto Rican. It's all Boricua. They have their own communities there, and it's very tight-knit. So there, boom. In North Carolina, you had this wave of immigrants who moved there years ago to be immigrant farm workers, and now all their children have come of age, and now there's a substantial population of Mexicans in North Carolina. And don't get me started on Florida. I just tweeted this morning about, don't tell me there's just Cubans in Florida. And I put out all the different demographics of the Latino vote in Florida, which is like 5 countries in one state.
I mean, Orlando itself, it's like a whole entire country of Puerto Ricans. So we know, obviously, this has been our as a Latino community, our sort of pain over the last forever is that our community does not turn out in the numbers necessary to fully exert sort of their influence that they deserve by what their numbers are. Are Democrats, is the Biden campaign, are the Senate campaigns, you are focused on the Latino vote. Do you see the effort necessary to turn that community out? Because if they did, I don't think this election is remotely close.
No, the answer is no. They do a decent job is debatable. And the presidentials will do just enough work to get just enough of 60 to 68% of the Latino vote. And then everybody in the press and everybody goes crazy. All right, they got the Hillary Clinton number. Okay, they got the Barack Obama number. We got it to 67%. That's kind of like jumping up and down and being glad you got third place. The point I want to make is that if you treated Latino voters like you treat white persuadable voters in the suburbs and put the same priority, Latinos would vote at 95% Democrat and the turnout would be through the roof. There were 12 million eligible Latinos in the last election who just didn't even show up, who were registered, who didn't even vote. Because guess what? Nobody asked them. Nobody talks to them. Because people have to remember that Latinos on average are 10 years younger than the average voter. We're just a newer immigrant population. On average, sure, there's old Latinos here. Here I am talking to you. My face is white because I'm old, but I am the exception to the rule. My son, who is 30, is the average Latino age of an American. And what that means is, guess what? Those young Latino voters act and perform like, Markos, other young voters, right? So you have to go talk to them about and give them a reason to vote. Hence why they all like Bernie. Hence why we did so well. But we didn't just do it because we had some crazy white-haired socialist Democrat from Vermont. It's because we spent $15 million to go talk to them. So people are like, I mean, that's the biggest key there.
You laid that out in your book, right? Tio Bernie, is that right? It was Uncle Bernie for us, you know, for us folks that don't speak Spanish. I have just a little tiny, and it's horrible. So I won't even torture you with it. But anyway, so you laid out this formula in your book. And for anybody who wants to, any Democrat, by the way, who wants to go get a look at how you put together a strategy to go get Latino voters, right? It's in there. You called Nevada the crown jewel of what you guys did on the Sanders campaign. I mean, what do you think was one of the most effective things you did there?
If I just give you one answer, it would be that we treated Latinos like white voters. And then if you said, well, what does that mean, Chuck? I'd give you three quick answers. One would be, guess what? We started early. We started talking to Latinos 7 months before caucus day. Then two, we hired a bunch of Latinos to work for us in those places and opened up the office in the community. I mean, this sounds like everybody at home's like, well, Chuck, that seems like common sense. Well, let me be assured, me and Markos and others can say this don't normally happen. And then the third thing is we ran a culturally competent campaign where everybody that touched every piece of creative was also a brown person. So we didn't have a bunch of woke white consultants showing up in the last 2 weeks, Google translating an English ad, putting it on Univision and saying, hey, we did the Latino outreach. We're done here. Like, we really were intentional about every aspect of that. And so I think that was the big key. You start early, you talk to people and show up where they're at. You come there with your hat in your hand and you just have a conversation in lots of mediums on where they're at. The last piece of that I would say is, TV commercials are not the way you do it. It's just one of the small ways you do it. Yeah. You do digital ads, you do mail pieces, you do newspaper ads, you knock on their door, you call them, you text them. Last is you treat them like they're a white voter, because that's how we talk to white voters every day for a long time.
It's funny because you throw out the number $15 million as though that was a big number.
Huge.
Yeah, and it's not, in the overall scheme of political spending, you have Joe Biden raising $350 million a month right now. And I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm not going to talk about the organization, but there's a major organization going to be spending some real money in support of MJ Hagar in Texas. Now, they themselves admit in their numbers that Hagar's weakest demographic are Latinos. Like, he has done very little to reach out to the Latino community. This is Texas, right? So you're going to be putting money into the border counties. You're going to be putting money where the Latino community is really concentrated in Texas. And they're like, oh no, it's going to be Houston and Dallas and Austin. And I was like, but you just said that the Latino vote was that was the weakest demographic for the Democratic Senate candidate. And they said, well, we hope to expand down to San Antonio and to the border counties. And it really was mind-boggling to me, because there's a lot of money being spent already. Obviously, you're going to target Austin and Houston and Dallas, right? But why don't you go where the votes, the weakest or the lowest hanging fruit is, of voters who aren't already aboard the MJ Hagar bandwagon, already, and by extension, the Biden campaign as well. Why? I mean, you work with these people, I assume, right? And you have to sit in a room with them and you have to plead for them to spend the money in the right places. What is holding them back?
I think it's because I've been doing this for 31 years, and nothing has really changed as far as the core group of people and the platform and strategy of how you run a campaign as a whole. I mean, it was really, really different than what we did with Bernie. It helped that we had Bernie. It helped that we had a lot of money. But being in the room to do things differently, there's not very many people in the room, Markos, who actually think about doing things outside of the playbook that me and you have seen a million times, which is raise a lot of money, do a lot of polling, do a lot of message testing, buy a lot of TV. And that's it. And that's what they do. Now, they see Black people as just a GOTV universe. We'll throw some money at them at the end and they'll just show up, and they take them for granted, to be honest, right? At the very end, the last month. And with Latinos, they say that they don't vote, right? And that we'll go talk. If they are in our persuadable universe, then we are already getting to them, Chuck, and 70% of them speak English. So it's not really worth blah, blah, blah. the bottom line is, when I answer this, and it's been the bane of my existence, and you know this, Markos, is that there's none of us in the room. We haven't been in the room since this thing started. And if Black people and brown people and gay people aren't in that room, that voice is not heard. And I don't care how woke you are as a white consultant, and I don't have anything against white people.
Male as well. Very
right.
male.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love white people. My mama is white. Let me be clear. I'm talking about the people in the room. So you lose that, and you lose that argument. So, and then in most campaigns, not this cycle, when it's time to cut budgets, what's the first thing that's cut? It's the outreach there, because that golden child of the white persuadable voter can't be cut. And the last point I'll make here, and this is just the bottom line, is that in the outside money game, the super PAC world that is supporting Joe Biden, the Senate, and the House, as of right now, there's been $1 billion spent, $1 billion with a B, spent talking to white persuadable voters. I sit at the presidential IE table with my super PAC that's called Nuestro PAC, right? We're the largest Latino super PAC out there. So I get to see their targets. We share, make sure we're not talking to the same people. Well, I didn't have to worry about that because none of them are talking to Latinos. They have a little program here and a little program there, but they're all focused either on white men or white women or people that voted for Donald Trump, all of them in some form or fashion, through the environment, through youth, through all these different things. $1 billion. That same group of people, there's 3 major Latino super PACs, me, Latino Victory, and Somos PAC. Together, we've raised less than $10 million. So it's $1 billion compared to 10 million. And then they want to come to me and say, Chuck, why do Latinos not vote?
Can I ask just one question as a counterbalance, which is, and I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but is any of this made up for by some of the ground game? Like, I know I've been doing phone banking. I mean, I know there are some members, I've been doing it with Unite Here, right? I've been doing it in Nevada with the Culinary Union. But I know Unite Here has an extensive phone banking effort that they were doing in Florida. They're expanding it to some of the Midwestern states. And I just wonder if you think that any of those efforts, I mean, the Culinary Union, of course, is like, founded entirely almost on the backs of female people of color, right? And so I just wondered if you think that any of that is making up for, not that it excuses anything from the top down, right? But is it helping to make up at all for some of the gaps? I don't know if you can make up for a gap like that.
First of all, I'll say the Culinary Union right now is about 80% laid off, and it's just heartbreaking on what's happening to those sisters and brothers out there because of what's happening in Las Vegas. They are one of the best organized, most powerful unions in America. So I always tip my hat to the Culinary. The real question you're asking me is that, can you make up for what you would spend on TV, radio, and mail by having a robust field effort? And the answer is no. The kind of good answer, though, is that it does make a huge difference, but it only makes a difference because it's only scalable to 1% to 3%, all depending on how big the election is. And my case in point, Kerry, is it's much more efficient for you to call people. It's much more efficient for you to text people, and you're banging through those. It's a predictive dialer system, or it's a peer-to-peer system on an online. Like, we run those out of my firm, Solidarity. But the real thing that reporters get wrong, and a lot of us who believe in field, and I'm a true believer in field, is that if you go knock on 100 houses in East Las Vegas, you may talk to 12 people in that 2 hours of knocking. And then of those 12, maybe only 3 or 4 of them are really in your persuadable universe. So, but that connection is the most powerful persuasion tool. Let's be clear. I'm not poo-pooing on field. It's just highly efficient unless you can scale it to a really big amount. What you're doing with texting and phones will make a difference, right? But if the targeting is right, are you texting a voter who normally don't vote? The key to Bernie Sanders, and I lay this out in the book, is not only the early and the cultural competency, was that we went and talked to voters who weren't talked to. In Nevada, there was 107,000 Latinos who had registered while Donald Trump had been the president that I knew nobody would talk to because they were newly registered Latinos. I also knew they'd probably be younger and understand Bernie. So I started having a conversation with them. Now, we called them, Kerry, and we texted them, but we also sent them 8 pieces of mail, a lot of digital advertisements, and showed up in their community where they were having social functions. All of those things make a difference, not just one of them. So if you just text and just call, it's not enough. But if you do that in conjunction with a multi-layered paid approach, it's the absolute perfect scenario.
So you talk about
$10 million with the 3 Latino super PACs versus $1 billion going after people who are stuck in Fox News land, basically, right? I mean, these are not, there's a reason they voted for Donald Trump, right? And it's not, but so the question is, why is it so hard for you and the other Latino super PACs to raise that kind of money? Because there's a lot of money out there. Money's not short. It's just not going to the right places. And why is that the case?
I've just been toiling with this and trying to figure it out. And what I've come to understand is there's just a whole group of donors and their advisors who are comfortable with just a handful of entities who people have validated, all led, by the way, by white people, right? And the donors primarily all white people, right? Nothing against white people, but they know each other. They trust each other. And that's cool because I trust people that I work with, and I don't want some just random person, no matter the color of their skin or who they love. I'm not going to judge them. And I don't think they're judging me. They're just comfortable not getting outside of a system that's put together of, if you're going to do presidential IEs, you do priorities. If you're going to do Senate IEs, you do Senate majority PAC. And if you're going to do House, you do House majority PAC. And if you don't believe me, you talk to Chuck Schumer, you talk to Nancy Pelosi, or you talk to Joe Biden, and they direct these donors to these things where it's supposed to be the correct place to be. And I'm really doing all I can to change that. There was a small group of donors, Markos, this will make you happy, who came together in the summer who said, we're not going to do priorities. We're going to invite priorities to be a part of this. And they brought in one Latino PAC, which was me, and they brought in Black PAC and some of the environmentalists and others, and we all bid against each other to try to get a seat at this table. And I kind of won the Latino hat, but we all got to coordinate. I got to see how they worked and what they were doing, and they were doing amazing work. Like, they do good work talking to white people. And let me be clear, that is a smart strategy. All I'm saying is take 25% of that budget and talk to Latinos and Black people, because that's what percentage they'll be in most states. And that's just smart math, right? So I think it's just getting the donors there. And I think me talking about these other donors kind of breaking off to fund me and a few others, I think is a sign that things are beginning to change.
Yeah. So Kerry wrote a piece, and she made a really good point that the 5 largest red states by population are now all of them are battlegrounds. We're talking Texas, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, right? And 3 of those are heavy Latino votes. 4 of those. There's a real chance, if you engage the Latino community the way it engaged in California, that Texas could be a bedrock blue state, right? I mean,
forever.
Can you talk about that the math on that?
Forever. And what I'm getting at there, boys and girls, is that in California, there's been a case study on this. There was a proposition in California called English Only, way back when I was a young man. And the AFL-CIO and all the donors got together before there were super PACs, and they invested $10 million. This was 20 years ago. And what they did is they registered Latinos in East LA and all up and down the state. They told them that this is racist, this English only thing, and they educated them on that issue. And then they spent the money to turn them out. Now, I would remind you, at that point in American history, they had a Republican governor and Republican majorities in both House and Senate in California. And that investment and that long-term investment in infrastructure turned that state blue. And you've never worried about California ever being red again. If that direct investment, that's the biggest difference between California and Texas, because the populations and the size are almost identical. So it just needs to be bunch of money put in there to get Latinos who really have only seen Republicans at the top of their ticket since Ann Richards. And I remember, because I worked on that race, that was 30 years ago, right?
And the co-founders are actually dumping money into it to try to keep that Latino community, if not Democratic, at least at least a chunk of them being Republican or even non-political. I mean, they know the dangers there.
I do wonder. I mean, I was surprised, heartily surprised, and also happy about the idea that that Senate Democrats were dumping, more than $8 million into the state in order to try and help MJ Hager over the edge over the finish line in these last couple of weeks. I feel like the powers that be in Washington for a long time have just sort of dismissed Texas as not gettable. So to even see them pour that kind of money in there at all seems like Democrats in Washington are sort of waking up to the fact that they could completely blow Republicans out of the water for a decade or more in terms of their electoral math if they actually flipped Texas.
I wrote about this morning in a quote where I'm quoted in The Hill when I said donors and other folks have just been leery of Texas because you walk up to this big old state. And I said, if you walk up to an elephant side by side, it's overwhelming. And if you've got to eat that elephant, guess what you have to do? You have to take the first bite and just eat it one bite at a time. And so that's what we're seeing now with small groups now starting to take a bite. More so the DCCC, which is not going to be a popular thing to say with my progressive brothers and friends, but they've put a marker down in Texas and spent probably the most amount of money than anybody in these congressional races for people of color, actually. Venezuela, the woman in Dallas, Cherie, Eastern Asian guy down in Texas. Yeah.
Hindi,
and like
in Hindi, it's pretty.
Hindi, absolutely. He's Indian. And I'm saying all these multiracial and diverse groups that they're working with down there, like they're doing real work, which may help lift the whole state until you said, Kerry, this week when Senate Majority said they were going to go down there and dump some money. Now, I was kind of giggling over here because I think they just have a wealth of riches and have run out of target states because Colorado and other ones have come off the map. Now they've raised $140 million.
But I'm going to make Chuck's kind of point here with that money coming into Texas right now. I think the reason that DC is suddenly really interested in Texas is because those white, suburban, college-educated women that we've seen flip everywhere suddenly have turned those Texas suburbs very, very blue, and has made the state more competitive. When you have millions of potential Latino voters that have been sitting on the sidelines, particularly in those border counties, right, Chuck, that haven't been engaged, haven't been directed. We could have done this earlier, but now with that turning of the suburbs, if we were able to invest in that Latino community, then you're looking at California version 2.0, right? Like baby California or California's,
Mark, you're really smart to bring up the border. And I know you talked about it earlier when you were talking about the cities. Think about this in the border, that there are such strong Democratic counties, right? That their only race is the primary. And there's always contested primaries because they're super Democratic, because they're super Latino districts, right? So because there's been Republicans on top of the ticket for so long, think about this at home, y'all. There's never a race on the top of the ticket. So a lot of those folks just vote in the primary because they haven't been showed a reason why, or there's never been really a race that big. There wasn't a big governor's race. So it's just another instance of where that investment would go a long way in the border. I would remind everybody, George Bush, when he ran for governor, got 45% of the Latino vote in Texas because he spent some money in Spanish to actually just go have a conversation. It's what Donald Trump's doing right now. You've seen Joe Biden's numbers be soft. Donald Trump went up in the summer with Spanish language communication while Biden was broke and not up, and did 1.5 million unanswered TV in Arizona and Florida, which has made Joe Biden's numbers soft in those two states for 4 months.
Right. So, Chuck, thank you so much for joining us. You're going to come back, right? Because there's a lot to follow up on, particularly the long-term trend stuff. I really want to dig into what we can do to make Arizona, Texas, and in some pipe to maybe Florida, more solidly Democratic in the years ahead. I think our democracy demands it, and we need to, as a community, as a Latino community, we need to be properly represented. So thank you so much, Chuck.
Also, I want to say, in honor of you, Chuck, I wore a hat today because I read that you wear a big cowboy hat for all your interviews. So there's not very many hosts that would like change their whole outfit in order to,
Kerry, me and we're going to
I feel like there's community here. So I just a plug for us in the future is all.
We're going to be good friends, Kerry. Don't you worry.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank y'all.
In the show notes, we're gonna put links to Chuck's book, Theo Bernie, to his super PAC, and obviously, Kerry. We weren't talking as much about the Latino vote earlier because it didn't seem as salient, but really that race has shifted to that Sun Belt in a major way. I mean, I don't think I saw that coming. Did you?
Yeah. And now I do wonder. So, now if you look at the aggregates, and again, we never want to, take Florida for granted because it's broken our hearts too many times. But, Biden's running +4 right now. And it makes me wonder, we had those polls early on that Chuck was talking about where it was, where Biden's numbers among Latinos were or Latino voters, which is a very diverse group of people, particularly in Florida, but we're a little soft. And I don't know, you've maybe paid more attention than I have. Has Biden, come up to speed a little bit in terms of some of those numbers with Latino voters in Florida, or is it still soft there? And if he had spent more money on this group of voters, would 4 + 4 be, +7 or something like that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely still soft. And Chuck is absolutely right. I'm not seeing a presidential focus on the Latino vote. Obviously, Joe Biden, I think, feels a lot more comfortable working with the Black community, and that is a critical community. So that makes a lot of sense. But I really haven't seen that from the Biden camp. Focus. And maybe it was just a function of he was really focused on Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan at the beginning. I mean, really, Arizona, I know you and I were talking about Arizona. The Biden campaign wasn't. And in 2016, Hillary Clinton made a late bid for Arizona. And a lot of people say that was a mistake, that she should have really just focused on the states she needed to win as opposed to expanding the map. And I suspect that the Biden campaign is a little sensitive to the idea that if something were to happen and they were to lose, that they would be blamed for paying attention to Texas and paying attention to Georgia and Arizona, when really all they need to do is win Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
Right.
But now they have more money than God, right?
Yeah, right. More money than God. And then you spread it around. And that's been really interesting to watch. I will say this too, what the map was going to look like before we had more money than God, right? Yes. What the map to 270 was going to look like for Democrats was going to be partially a function of who ended up winning the nomination. And Biden won the nomination. He's, as everyone knows, originally born in Scranton, Pennsylvania. This is a demographic that Democrats thought this is who we need to focus on, right? This is where Biden sells best, potentially, is to these sort of, upper Midwestern states, the Michigans, the Wisconsins, the Pennsylvanias, right? So it doesn't surprise me that their early emphasis was on making sure that they didn't mess up those states, especially when you look at how, in Michigan, right, the closest of all of the 2016 blue states that flipped to Trump, Trump won by, like 0.25%. So, 10,000 votes there. So it kind of doesn't surprise me that they thought, we got someone who can really sell in this area. It's traditionally blue. We know these areas and we can get these voters back. I think, it was hard to imagine it was hard to imagine the coronavirus. This entire election was going to be the economy until March, April, May.
I know. We couldn't foresee the coronavirus pandemic. We couldn't even see the utter inability of Trump to manage this thing in any sort of competent way, right? I mean, and it's we talked about this last week, but it's only moved numbers a couple points, right? But when a lot of things, a lot of states that were close are less close. A lot of states where we were slightly behind, like Arizona and Georgia, now we're slightly ahead. So those points actually really do matter on those edges. And they're going to really matter in some Senate contests. And I think this is a great opportunity here to sort of segue into our next guest. He is David Neer. He is a Daily Kos political director. And he and his team focus on down-ballot races, mostly in the Senate, the House, state governorships, state legislatures. So it's, David, thank you so much for joining us. It's looking to be much more, the opportunities are richer than we expected when we started this cycle. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. It's really been amazing to watch the map expand, as you and Kerry were just talking about. At the start of this cycle, Democrats had this really narrow path back to retaking the Senate, which I like to say that beating Trump was priority one and taking this.
David, can I interrupt you a second? So we're just having a little bit of trouble with your microphone there. I'm afraid, and I don't mean to be rude, I'm afraid people aren't going to be able to get what you're telling us. I wonder if there's a fix, and I don't know what it is. Markos, do you have any idea? You could re-sign on is what our technical person is telling us, and we'll see if we can pick you up a little bit better the next time. Is that a possibility? I'm afraid people won't be able to get through the interview.
All right. So while David restarts and resigns back on,
because David is going to tell us such good stuff, and
of course,
in particular, you know, I mean, first of all, can we just brag about Daily Kos elections for a second, right? I mean, I would love for you to brag about them because their sort of knowledge about the minutia of all of these different districts across the country. I mean, other outlets steal their data. I shouldn't say steal. They use their data because Daily Kos Elections has, you know, does a better job of sifting through all this data for all these counties on the elections than really any other outlet. Wait, can you brag about them for a second?
The Daily Kos Elections data team is sort of like the gold standard in the political world. They're the ones that are calculating presidential vote by legislative district, by congressional district. They are pulling in census data. They're making new maps. In fact, just today, they introduced a sort of almanac of every congressional district in the country, where they're pulling in education, what the district looks like, race, those kind of numbers, and presidential performance, and the performance of governors at the statewide level. I mean, it's just like reams and reams of data. And what it does is it helps contextualize, right? So Daily Kos Elections, for example, in 2018, they came up with this metric where they would look at the polling and they would see how much, and election results, how much it had shifted from Trump's 2016 numbers, right? So, you know, you have a special election in Oklahoma and you go, oh, so the Democrat did 8 points better than Hillary Clinton, right? And we look at another race. And so that gave us a head start to realizing that 2018 was going to be this big Democratic wave. Nobody else was talking about it, but those data quants at Daily Kos Elections were going, there's a shift happening. And you know what? It's happening everywhere. And it's particularly and especially happening in suburban areas. Right. So we had an advance notice that the big 2018 wave was going to happen because those guys were tracking the data. Right. And so it feels a little bit like cheating, to be honest, to have access to this information, because it makes me sound really smart when really it's just looking at what the data is really speaking to. Do we know how David's doing?
It looks to me like we're going to give David another try. We're going to see how it goes. We're just going to use the regular computer mic, and hopefully it'll work.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah.
All right.
And we spent like 5 minutes talking y'all up. So make it good. Make it good.
Well, clearly we are better at crunching data than we are at figuring out how to use USB microphones. But let's get rolling.
I had my own early difficulty when we started the show, right? So I'm not going to be the one to talk for sure. So the question was, we did not expect a map as big as what we've seen now. Can you talk about just how many more opportunities have opened up than when we started the year?
Absolutely. The Senate map, I've always said that beating Trump is obviously priority number one. Flipping the Senate, I call priority 1A, because if McConnell still holds the Senate, even if Joe Biden wins, then everything grinds to a halt. The path to taking back the Senate really looked quite narrow at the start of the cycle. You had Colorado, the special election in Arizona, and then you had to kind of hope you could also win Maine and North Carolina and sort of figure that Doug Jones, awesome as he is, probably wasn't going to win re-election. That would just give Democrats a narrow path back to a 50-50 Senate, and with, you know, the vice president breaking ties. But that has completely opened up and changed in so many ways. You had Iowa come online, where Joni Ernst has really shown she was nothing special and just kind of got washed in by the 2014 wave. You have Montana, where we landed a unique, one-of-a-kind candidate in Governor Steve Bullock. And then now you have, late in the game, all of these other Senate races that really Republicans have no business worrying about coming into play. 2 elections in Georgia, Texas, Kansas, Alaska, and South Carolina. We can't forget South Carolina, so where Jamie Harrison just set the all-time fundraising record for a Senate campaign in a quarter. So even if Democrats don't sweep all of these seats, the fact is Republicans are playing so much defense that it opens up the opportunities for us in those kind of better races. We have a better chance of winning those races if Republicans are really scrambling to protect as many seats as they are.
Yeah, and you talked about, you threw out so many races, and it's inevitable that you would forget one, right? And it was Texas, because there's just so many opportunities. And the words Texas and competitive in the same sentence still like blow my mind. And yet here we have John Cornyn, who is an entrenched Republican, who is in senior leadership. I think he's the number 2 or the number 3 in the Senate, number 2 in the Senate. And he's suddenly in the fight for his life in a state that should be actually quite easy. And he thought it was going to be easy, right?
Absolutely. Though we had a real excellent early warning sign in 2018 when Beto O'Rourke lost by only 3 points. It was the best performance in a statewide election in Texas that Democrats had had in a really, really long time. And I think that a lot of people thought, well, Beto was a unique candidate. Ted Cruz has special vulnerabilities. These things were all true.
Yeah, Beto, I mean, Cruz is probably the least likable Republican in the Senate. So that's one way we rationalize why that was a different election than this year.
Right. And also, people rightly say Texas is such an expensive state. We have so many other opportunities, so on and so forth. But 2020 has turned into such a year with Trump's wrecking of the economy, his disastrous handling of the coronavirus, and the continuing change in demographics in Texas. You've talked about the suburban voters. We've talked about more active Latino voters. And that race is super, super close. And most interesting is this real vote of confidence that Democrat MJ Hagar has gotten from outside sources. The #1 Democratic super PAC, the Senate Majority PAC, just said they were going to put in about $9 million on her behalf. There was another report today where Silicon Valley mega donors are talking about putting in $28 million on her behalf. This is some serious money. And, this really could be the year that we make major gains in Texas, even if, I know, my mouth to God's ears, right? But one area that I have to call attention to is even if we don't win the Senate race, let's also remember the Texas State House. Democrats need to flip 9 seats there. There are, as it happens, 9 Republicans who sit in seats that Beto O'Rourke won in 2018. So there's a real map, a real path. And if we can flip the Texas House, then the entire GOP agenda in the largest red state in the country grinds to a halt.
And redistricting, which the map, it's amazing that we've made so many gains in Texas at the U.S. House level, given that it was a map specifically gerrymandered to keep Democrats out of power. And that's one of the mid-decade gerrymanders too, right?
So, yeah, the map changed a bunch because of litigation. But the reality is that in a state like Texas, Republicans can only outrun demographic change quite so fast. And, Texas is home to some of the largest cities in the country. And that also means we're home to some of the largest suburban areas. They tend to be pretty affluent, pretty well educated. And these are areas that not only did they move against Trump and the GOP very badly over the last 2 years, but they've continued to do so because Republicans don't have an answer for these sorts of voters. And so, yeah, Republicans are defending really as many as 10 U.S. House seats in Texas. Are Democrats going to win all 10? Of course not. But the fact that Republicans, again, like I was talking about with the Senate map, the fact that they have to worry about so many seats means that they are really screwed. I don't see any path for them to take back the House.
Yeah, and they have a fraction of the money that Democrats do. Particularly the House committee, the Democrats have vastly outraised the Republican House committee, and the individual candidates, thanks to Act Blue, have dramatically outspent those Republicans, which again expands the map, and it makes a lot of seats that should be competitive more competitive. Correct?
Which I think is a good segue into our next question, right? Which is because we do fundraising on the site, and we're in this final stretch, and I think there's a lot of people who think, what kind of difference? I mean, dropping $28 million into a state can make a difference. But, I think there's a lot of, since that's not happening for me here in my little office. But I do think there's a lot of grassroots donors out there who are thinking, well, what kind of difference can my $50 or $25 or whatever it is, $10 really make in a race at this point? Can you give us a few, I don't know, 3-5 races where you really think where there's maximal impact potentially to affect a race? And I'm talking about anywhere from a Senate on down to somewhere in the state legislature or a state Supreme Court or something like that, where directing some grassroots donors to those areas actually could push someone just over the edge at the last second.
Absolutely. There's been almost this meme of sorts going around. You see it a lot on Twitter from people who think that they're very, very smart and maybe aren't quite so clever, saying, well, how can these campaigns spend all this money? The answer is there's always an opportunity to spend more money on contacting voters and helping them vote and helping them get to the polls. But also, it's very easy to look at the campaigns that are raising massive sums and forget about the thousands of other candidates out there who don't get the attention of those top tier Senate races, who really do need the help, the kind that you're talking about, Kerry. At the very top of my list, I will put the race for the Michigan Supreme Court.
Ooh!
The reason why I know that's a state near and dear to your heart, Kerry. The Republicans currently control the Michigan Supreme Court by a 4-3 advantage. They have one of their seats as an open seat this year. And if we flip it, Democrats are supporting Elizabeth Welch, and so is Daily Kos. This is a race where progressive donors can get tremendous bang for their buck. And what's really astonishing is that a couple of weeks ago, in a 4-3 strict party line decision, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled that Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer did not have the authority to issue emergency orders to stop the coronavirus pandemic. And guess what's happening? Coronavirus cases are exploding all over the Midwest. So this is a totally lawless, out of control court that doesn't recognize the legitimate authority of elected Democrats. And we can flip it from 4-3 Republican to 4-3 Democrat. That is definitely my top choice.
As a totally random thing, I actually went to high school with Elizabeth Welch. So I live in California now, but I grew up in East Grand Rapids, Michigan. And Elizabeth Welch and I went to school at the same high school, East Grand Rapids High School. So I totally support it. I honestly did not know you were going there. So that was complete ignorance, but it's a nice coincidence. Anyway.
I can see you're ready to donate right when
I'm going to smash that donate button just as soon as we get off. And go Elizabeth, because this is exactly the type of lower profile, election or race where this could really make a difference, David. So that's perfect. So anyway, give us a couple more. We're hungry for it.
Absolutely. So sort of continuing the theme in a way, one area where Daily Kos is focused on a lot in recent years are elections for Secretary of State. These are sort of unglamorous posts that don't get nearly enough attention, but these are the folks who in most states are responsible for administering elections. These are the people who actually make sure that the polling places are, set up and ballots are received and counted, and that the procedures are proper procedures are followed. And of course, local election officials really play a huge role in that too, but direction and leadership comes from the top. And there are, in fact, 2 secretaries of state in the Pacific Northwest. Both posts are held by Republicans. And that might seem surprising, but both Washington State and Oregon have Republican secretaries of state. And Democrats are running 2 excellent candidates in Washington, Gail Tarleton, and in Oregon, Shamia Fagan. They are both fair-minded, independent leaders who will protect and expand the right to vote. The Republicans they're running against are, they're the sort of people who who don't necessarily want to make sure that everyone can vote. And the Democrats who are running can. So Daily Kos has endorsed both of these candidates as well. And I strongly recommend donations to these races. These races also, the total dollar values spent in these contests is typically far lower than in a Senate race. There's no one raising $57 million a quarter for Oregon Secretary of State. So grassroots dollars really get huge bang for the buck in contests like these.
Could I burden you with tweeting out after this a tweet with the people that you mentioned so that anyone can get to it. You go to, if you're on Twitter, you can go to @David_Neer. Is that right?
Just David Neer, no underscore.
Just David Neer. I'm wrong. @David Neer. And he's going to tweet out the 3 people he just mentioned so that if you want to give to any of those states, the Michigan, the state Supreme Court position, Washington and Oregon, the secretaries of state, David will tweet about it and you can get the information there.
All right. And then one last question, David, before we go. What is the one Senate race that you think is most likely to flip? They'll just blow everybody's mind, that nobody's sort of expecting it. Is there that big surprise, or do we have a good idea of what's competitive at this point?
That's just the thing. What you said there at the end. We at Daily Kos Elections, we rate the competitiveness of all of the races for the Senate, and we have, I think, 10 or 11 Republican-held seats now that we rate as highly competitive. And so everyone does have a really good sense of this universe. But I would not sleep on Kansas in particular. I definitely, we're still the underdogs there. We have an excellent candidate, State Senator Barbara Bollier, a former moderate Republican who switched parties 2 years ago out of disgust at what the Republican Party had become. Kansas is surprisingly highly educated state, and it also has some pretty sizable suburban areas. So it kind of fits the model for these areas that have been trending toward Democrats in recent years. Is 2020 going to be our year? Perhaps not. But I would expect a very close race there. And I think the future in Kansas could be promising.
Yeah, I think Kansas's problem is it doesn't have the urban centers, and I really I would like to see Kansas sort of swallow Kansas City, because it doesn't seem that Missouri is using them, and because you're right, Kansas is one of only 2 states in the top half of most educated states in the country that is still red. The other one being Utah for religious purposes, of course. So my vote for that would be Mississippi, and nobody's saying Mississippi is going to go blue, but if there's a sleeper state that just sort of somehow happens and blows everybody's mind, I think might be Mississippi, maybe Alaska, but obviously deep underdogs. It is Mississippi. Democrats can't get more than 12% of the white vote. But if they sleep, if Mississippi Republicans are sleepy enough, and if Trump suppresses his own vote as much as he seems to be suppressing, and we get some good luck, and about 10 other things happen that are probably not going to happen. But if that's the state, I think Mississippi would be the one that could just blow everybody's mind.
All right. Go ahead, please.
I just my parting thought there is we shouldn't even be talking about Mississippi. And the fact that we're talking about it speaks volumes.
Well, so if Markos gets to bring up Mississippi, I have one pet question too that I'd like to just, there was this Friday poll that came out, and it was an internal poll. It was in the Democratic Senator Doug Jones of Alabama, showed him down by 1. And, obviously if Democrats manage to pull that out, then the path gets so much easier, even so much easier than, so what do you think? I mean, I don't think people are inclined. It helps them. I don't think to put out an internal poll that they don't stand behind. But what do you think that Tommy Tuberville, the Republican, is really just like that terrible of a candidate that Doug Jones is that good of a candidate for Alabama? He has a chance.
The polling has been kind of all over the map. Republicans have released internal pollings showing them up by double digits. I suppose you really can't rule anything out there. Jones is a pretty singular candidate. Tuberville sucks. He has not been running a visible campaign. His fundraising has been terrible. Basically, what he's hoping for is to, just not screw up, stay hidden, and hope that Trump carries him over the top. That's a strategy that often works in a state that red. But, again, like I say, anything is truly possible this year.
So, David Neer, thank you so very much. David is Daily Kos' political director. You can David Neer at his Twitter account at David Neer, and you can read him at Daily Kos Elections. I may be a little biased, best elections coverage anywhere. Thank everybody for joining us today. That's the show. Make sure you subscribe to Daily Kos. I'm going to leave you with one to-do list, and that is to go to dailykos.com/GOTV. GOTV for Get Out the Vote. There's like 6 different things you can do on there. You can make calls. You can write postcards. Find something that is sort of up your alley, fits your personality, and get it done. We have 2 weeks left. Leave it all on the road. We have a chance to win historically large victories. So let's squeeze every last vote possible.
Yes.
Because Kerry, we're not going to get these opportunities very often.
No. And I can tell you, as someone, I don't really love to phone bank, but I've been doing it. In fact, I've never done it. I've used to cover it as a reporter, but I'd never done it. And I've been phone banking. And there are moments that are like really, truly gratifying of like, helping someone figure it out and find their polling place or whatever it is. Or just reveling in like Kamala Harris being the vice presidential nominee. So with another person in another state who's voting Democrat. So anyway, I recommend doing this because if you don't live in one of these swing states, you can still make a huge difference.
You can make a huge difference. And people have been making a huge difference. It's why we are here today. We got to keep going until that clock says 0, which is in 2 weeks. So thank you very much. Again, dailykos.com/GOTV for Get Out the Vote. I am Markos Moulitsas with Kerry Eleveld. Thank you so much for joining us. Catch you next week, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, next Tuesday. Until then, thank you very much. Keep fighting.
The last Tuesday before. Whoa. Mind blown. Right.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.